Yeah, what's up, y'all? Man, on this next little episode of What the Fuss, right? I want to talk about learning to be able to forgiveness, right? You know, I was just thinking to myself, like, we can apologize to one another as much as we want to, and sometimes that apology for some is not enough, because, we feel that if a person wronged us and do us wrong, sometimes it's hard to forgive when the person has done you wrong. Apologies, like now I like to call them apologize. People like to apologize. They apologize in the name and the sake of saying that they apologize, but they didn't really apologize. They just said it. They just said it to get it out of their system, to make it seem like they actually really did something, but in reality, they gonna do it again, And it's sad that we have to look at some people like that for what it is and for what they are, liars, And people like to apologize. And some people like to be lied to, But what I'm having to have to learn is to learn to forgive. I need to forgive. So many people have done me wrong, and I sit here and I say, you know what, I ain't do you like that. Why, if I shown you nothing but respect and giving you nothing but respect, why are you sitting here giving me nothing but hard time and grief and making me feel like I did something wrong? And then I try to be the bigger person. I go out my way. I try to apologize, to make amends, because I ain't trying to have no issues with nobody. I ain't trying to be out here beefing with nobody. At this stage, I ain't trying to beef with nobody, But what people are doing is lying. Apologize, So the only thing that we can do is learn to forgive. Learn to forgive. I know that's easier said than done. I know that's harder for some people because some people might have been wronged or done and mistreated. It's like if a person has been assaulted, if a person has been molested, if a person has been violated in a way, sometimes them apologies not going to work. Apologizing and saying you sorry, sometimes that's not going to work, And people don't want to hear that. Because they know it's not coming from a sincere place, They know it's not coming from a place of sincerity, It's not genuine. Like I say, people just apologize. They just say it for the sake of saying it, to get it out of their system, to make you feel, they think they making you feel better, but then at the end of the day, they're going to do it again and again and again and again and again. But what we all must learn to do is forgive, because sometimes if we don't forgive, guess what? You might be blocking your blessings. You actually might be blocking your blessings from receiving the things that you are wanting in life, because you're harboring anger, harboring frustration, mad at the world because this person wronged you, And sometimes all we want is an apology, but guess what? The reality of it is we may never get that apology, And that's the truth about that. So, because we may not get that apology, it's best to forgive ourselves for the situation and also to forgive them. And like I said, I know that's harder and that's easier said than done, Apologize. But we need to learn to forgive, Learning to forgive, that's a challenge within itself. That's a feat within itself, How can you forgive someone that you feel has done you wrong? How can you forgive someone that you has violated you in whatever magnitude? Mentally, physically, People can lie on your name and all of a sudden spread rumors and got people looking at you in different ways, and you're wondering why things is not going a certain way and why people all of a sudden distances themselves away from you. You know, so you know what I try to do? I take a step back. I take a step back and I try to internalize, okay, what did I do? What did I do wrong? What did I say wrong? What did I do to cause this problem? You know? And then sometimes in reality, you might not have done anything. You know, you might not have done anything, and you going through all this hardship and this grief, you know, trying to figure out, like, damn, what did I do? You know? But at the end of the day, the only thing we could do is apologize. Apologize and try to forgive. You know? Apologize and try to forgive, you know? Pardon me for that. You know, I dropped my book bag. You know, I got to pick it up, you know? But we have to learn to forgive. And I know that's easier said than done, and I'm repeating myself. You know what I'm saying? Because, like, a lot of people, they like, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but nah. If a person did me wrong, you know, some people hold that grudge. You know, some people hold that anger and that resentment. And in their heart, you know, depending on the situation, they feel as though they cannot forgive. You know? They feel as though in their heart, they cannot forgive a person for what they have done to them. What was done to them. And you know what? And granted, rightfully so, who am I or who is anyone to tell the next person, get over it? You know, I apologize, you know, get over it. Nah, it's deeper than that. Because depending on the situation and how the situation played out, you know, like I say, that apology may not have any weight. It may not carry any validity behind it. You know what I'm saying? Because sometimes people just say things just to say it, you know, and don't actually mean it, you know. But you got to learn to forgive. We all must learn to forgive, you know. Don't forget. I ain't saying just because you forgive the situation that you forgot what was done. No, I'm not saying that. You know, never forget what somebody has done to you, you know. Never forget that. You know, but at the same time, we shouldn't harbor all that resentment and that anger and that strife, because guess what? At the end of the day, it ain't doing nothing but hurting you in the end, because you're still dwelling on it. You're still dwelling, you're still processing the fact of, hey, I ain't getting no apology. They didn't say they were sorry. They did me wrong. They stole from me. They put their hands on me. They violated me. They raped me. They did whatever, you know? And you don't feel as though that they was sincere in their so-called apologize, you know. But I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up, right? And I'm gonna say we need to learn how to forgive. Forgive yourself first and foremost. If no one is man or woman enough to apologize for their manipulation, for their lies, for their wrongdoings that they have brought on to you, forgive yourself first and foremost. Forgive yourself for the thoughts that you had, the anger that you held on to. Forgive yourself. Let it go. You know, let it go. Because you're gonna find yourself 10, 20, 30 years from now, you're going to find yourself 50, 60 years old, still holding on to the fact that somebody did something wrong to you back in 1988, 99, 2000, you know, and you like, damn, I see these people every day and they still didn't apologize to me, but I've always apologized to them. So you got to learn to forgive yourself and just say, you know what, I forgive you. But when you say that you forgive these people, you need to be sincere about it. Be sincere about it, you know? Be sincere about it. And on that note, I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm going to see y'all next time on What the Fuss.